Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 1. We're in the middle of chapter 153, page 302. So after explaining at length in the previous discourses the two types of Ila va'alul, cause and effect, which really is essentially two types of transmission. That's really another way of just putting it. Transmission. Something transmits and just continues and extends from the original in a diminished form. Think of it like the tree into a branch. Or it transmits and it changes form and personality. Think of Moichin and Midas. And we have examples of it galore throughout nature and throughout existence. Here he's using it obviously in the flow of the divine transmission as it flows from Atzilus into Biyah. So as Atzilus, L'tzerech Atzilus is whatever is happening in that domain is essentially the energy that's of a similar personality. And the ultimate of it is when Chachma reigns, when Chachma dominates, as we said, even Malchus, even the five lower spheres of Malchus are all illuminated. And then you have a state where it is diminished from Bina, for example, the flow is diminished, begins the Reishish Ishtalshlus, Makar Ishtalshlus. And there, it goes through gradations and actually changes Muhus, like you said, a Muhus Nivdal. So it's not like the Etzem. And the transmission is changing personality, changing shape and form as it descends. So he says, and the example for that is as in Mechin and Midas. So even though intelligence exists within the emotions, and we're not talking impulsive emotions that we called earlier Ratzon, that just comes naturally. We're talking about emotions that are deliberate and a result, an outgrowth, a birth from a Hizbaranus, from a contemplation and a comprehension. So he said, so though a reflection of the intelligence is in there, the intelligence is affecting it, it's maturing it, it's godless hamidus, as we spoke. There's even in the intelligence itself there's inclinations in the midas, but in the midas itself, the end of the line, it's a ha'ar and nivdalas. She'enim muhus ha'meichin. So midah itself, a personal feeling, subjective feeling, what I like, what I don't, and so on, is of a different personality, different ilk than the meichin, than the intelligence. And they said, L'havin hadugma mizeh l'mayla is what we're learning now. To understand this l'mayla, what's a l'mayla? So you go into a long discussion in Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad. And first comes the introduction to it. What is the introduction? That we see from the two expressions that there's two dimensions of Iyu, and there's two ways that they're of Yichud. You say Iyu v'chayu echad, you don't say Iyu v'chayu v'gamu echad. You say Iyu, we're not even interpreting now what chayu and gamu is. We'll get to that in a moment. Whatever it is, it's Iyu v'chayu echad is one track. So the Iyu that connects with Chayu doesn't say Iyu v'chayu v'gamui, and also the Chad says twice. In other words, both Iyu, the word Iyu and the word Chad are twice. So clearly both the level of Iyu, obviously it's one God, but the dimension of Iyu that connects to Chayu is different than the one that connects to Gamui. That's and he brings the Geras HaKedesh that what do we have here? Iyu goes on Ein Sof. The Kreicha Ein Sof to create. Only Ein Sof has that power. But the method of creation works through Al Yodam, like he says, Bahem Val Yodam, through Gamui. Through Chayu and Gamui, actually. But from them alone, however you interpret Gamui, like he says, whether you interpret it as the Midas, Zayin Tachtenis, or you interpret it as the Kalim, that's not the creator. That's the tool, an instrument that unites with the Creator to create. Okay. Then he goes into, and in this there's a difference between how he unites with Iyu and there's the way he unites with Gamui, with Chayu, and the way we unite with Gamui. To understand this, he says, what is Chayu and what's Gamui? What is it? So the difference is, there's two opinions. Whether they are reconciled or not is not relevant here right now, but there's two different things that are stated. In Eitz Chaim, he says, Chayui is Gimel Rishenus, Moichin, in other words. Gamui Azayin Tachtenis, Midas. Here he's not using Moichin and Midas yet, But Gimel Rishenis generally means Chachma Bina Das or Keser Chachma Bina. And Zayin Tachtenis are the 7 lower spheres. So sometimes the way you define them is lower and higher, like we talked about Malchus. Hey Spheres Rishenis, Hey Spheres Achrenis. So they're not always defined as Zah and Malchus, or Meichen and Midas, or Seichel and Midas. Sometimes Zayin Tachtenis. The Alter Rebbe, however, teaches that Chayu is air, and Gemuri are containers. So different interpretation. You could even be seen as very different, because you could say that containers are not necessarily emotions. So now the Rebbe Rashab continues and starts with, let's talk with a simple interpretation. What does Garmui mean? And what does Chayu mean in simple Hebrew? So Garmui are the bones. He brings the proof from Etzem Atzomai, the Targum Onkelos. What are the bones? The bones is the primary skeleton and structure. We call it the substance and matter of the body. Yes, in truth, it comes from a very deep place, because it's etzem, also from the word core, higher than hispashtus. That's why the bones, the core cell skeleton doesn't have, is not fleshed out, no pun intended. It has no flesh, no skin, so it doesn't have the shape in what we would call the shape of a body. That's because the skeleton. Literally, when we say a skeleton, that's the outline. Then you come and fill it in. It's like Bria, not Yitzira. Not, it doesn't say that here, but and then you come flesh it out, and you have a body with certain features. Even though the skeleton also has features, it's not going into it, but it's still core skeleton. It's like the core, like when you lay out a structure, a building, you'll see there's a skeleton. It doesn't yet have the colors, for sure not, the shape, the distinction between one building and the next. So that's so. So even though it has an union of atzmis, like he brought from the Zohar, I didn't look up whether moich is marrow or that, but and that's why they're sustained and they endure even after decomposition. Now that's begashmis. Now let's go back now beruchnis. When you say Iva Chayu Chad Iva Gamu Echad, what is that? So he brought the Pasuk Eliyahu. Pasuk Eliyahu. There's 2 things in Pasuk Eliyahu. First, he says he crafts shapes. Tikinun Gufin. Right there you have Gufin. What's Gufin? Kalim. In this case, like the bones, like the skeleton, the Kalim. And then the Ahu Nevi, then it flows like a soul into a body. That's the Eris. So Eir and Keli is like a neshama in a guf. 1 second. Then he says, and even though the Eir also has 10 spheres, so they also have structure, but the Iker Metzias, like with the skeleton, the Iker outline, the primary element that gives the sphere's shape and form is the skeleton. Like the bones in our body, here's the Kelim of Atzilus. Good. And the air is more the energy within it. Then he adds something which I think is not said anywhere earlier in the Hemshech, which is a very interesting point. I made a point yesterday, but I'll just emphasize it again. His eye, they do have spheres, so you can't say that they're completely. He said, but from the perspective of Kalim, what Kalim call Metzias, the spheres and Eris are not called structure. So he said the idea before, for sure he said that relative to Kalim, the Eris are pshutim. But here, he for some reason I feel there's the more words he says, like he says, from the perspective of conscious wisdom, unconscious wisdom, Chachmas Tema is not Chachma. But it's clearly Chachma, like we spoke about. But it's just not a Chachma that we can relate to. So we don't call it wisdom. Now I said, I'm not saying this was not Pshat earlier, but for some reason I had it here. And I guess the reason is because he wants to make it very clear that the skeleton and structure is the Kalim, not the Eris. So even though the Eris have amorphous and the subtle way they have spheres, but you cannot call them the fundamental skeleton structure. That's for sure. So I think it adds a lot of Havana in what we were talking the whole time, to understanding the difference between spheres and Eir and spheres and Kalim. Kalim is far more the structural element of it, which we did discuss, but it just, it doesn't hurt to sense it even more. Okay. Because the Ikra Metzi is here not Kelim. I'm just reading what we learned, but I'm just elaborating a bit more. Okay. I gave the example, for example, when you say to somebody, if you're in the world of touch, physical touch, the idea of being touched by a song or by a love or something that's not tangible doesn't exist. Physical touch doesn't relate to that. It's because we also have a sense of the intangible, that's why we can relate to it. Like I said, from the perspective of fingers, Chachma doesn't exist.
So why do we say I've been touched by your generosity? We use the word touch.
No, because we mean it. We mean this more subtle touch. I meant the physical touch. If someone says, "Listen, if I can't touch it with my fingers, it doesn't exist." You say, "Yeah, your fingers. It doesn't exist in the world of your fingers." Like with Rebbe Rashab's famous mashal with the maskilim, when they came and they said to him, "We never saw angels. Angels exist." So he told them, "How did you get here?" Famous story. They came in a wagon. He said, "So what was the wagon?" There was a wagon schlepped by horses. You were sitting inside the wagon, coming all the way here. What were the horses thinking as they were running? They were thinking about the hubbard, the hay that they're going to eat when they get to the destination. So they run fast to get to it. What is the wagon driver thinking? He's thinking the money he's going to get paid, so he can go home and have a little parnasa from his job. And you are sitting inside the wagon discussing your philosophies. So he says, "Well, bald the het vertrachten hubbard is the seichel can seichel nicht." Because if the horses are thinking about hay, does that mean the seichel that you guys are talking are not seichel? Because in other words, what he's saying is just because you can't see to angels on your terms doesn't mean angels are not angels. Essentially, in other words, everyone speaks on their terms. Of course, if someone said to you, like I always bring the example of the fisherman, he spread out fish across a net across the seas, gathered up all types of fish, documented colors, shapes, sizes, comes to a great conclusion. There are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half inch long. Mm-hmm. He's about to make an announcement until his little child tells him, like the emperor with no clothes, let's see the net. The net has spaces of a half inch. So all he has to add is one thing. A net that has space of a half inch will never catch fish that are shorter than a half inch, but you don't need a chacham for that. So you could say, yeah, it doesn't exist, but someone will say to you, with what did you measure? It doesn't exist, you didn't see it. Oh, your eyes. Okay. What about a microscope? Other tools. I mean, it's a medical way of looking that people say something's not true, or it's not real. I have no problem. You can say it's not real in your realm, but tell me what tools you're using before you tell me it's not real. Maybe another realm, it's completely real. So, I think it's a good way to just understand different stages, like we talk about more edle understanding of reality. For some people, if they don't touch it, like this, it doesn't exist. Some people tell me that live in this world, they say, I don't know, you're into this spiritual things, I count money. It's the only thing I relate to. If I can't count it, it doesn't exist. It's sad. And then that person thinks I'm as Rahman as Ami, because I don't get reality.
Why they count all day?
Yeah. We talked about it earlier when we talked about numbers. Sfira says numbers. So there's the tangible number where the person just knows the number. He doesn't know the quality. He's counting 1,000,000. When we heard the word million, unless you counted each individual, you know, 1,000,000. Million is a statistic. It's a statistic. It's a number. It's a symbol.
I could be counting 1,000,000 nuts instead of 1,000,000.
Right. Anyway, so now he goes further, and we learn this as well. And this comes to another nukuda here. There's two opinions in Kabbalah about Kalim. Just like there are two opinions on Eretz, whether Eretz has particles, at least subtly or not. Same thing with Kalim. Are Kalim actual Kalim Gvul, or is it only Kayach HaGvul? You could argue that the Kalim of Atzilus are not really a skeleton. They're just Lagabe Biyah. It's like with the example of you can write infinite things, but your hand limits the flow, so it's only a Gvul for outside of Atzilus. The Alter Rebbe, that's the part of the Shishita.
That's Kachim.
Yeah.
That's what?
The Kalim of Kachim.
Not Gvul Mamish. The Alter Rebbe And similar to Avedis HaKodesh, says Kelim are Mamish Gvul. Which, of course, is more helpful here to our discussion because we want to establish, just like he said, Eidos are, he went the other way around. First he established, he said, don't Eidos also have Sfiras? He says, yeah, but their Sfiras are Pshutim compared to Kelim. Now he goes the other way around. Maybe Kelim are Pshutim. And it just appears to be Gvul. Because he's trying to establish that Garmui is Kelim. Remember, according to that Izal, where it says Garmui is Midas, the whole thing, you don't know about the Kelim. You can say Midas, okay, the Midas are the one that draw down. Thank you. Okay, so now he goes the other way. So Kelim, so let's read that. That Kelim now he goes on. That Kelim Himchinas Hagvul. Shalatzils. Okay, Moshe Kosaberg Avedis HaKodesh. And here goes there's Kashem Shesh Lekeich B'Blul B'Bligvul rather built about Gvul. Same thing. He has the power to create Gvul. Because if not, you're diminishing his shleimus.
Wait, so maybe the Kelim Apshitas are a bit lower than them, no?
Let's finish reading. And the Kelim that come from it are Kelim of Atzilus. So that's the first expression, manifestation of the power of Gvul of Elokus. And it's part of the shleimus of Elokus. And he says, Chein Kosav Rabbeinu Zal, Alter Rebbe and Tanya Geras HaKodesh, HaKelim B'chinas Gvul. The Pardes Fidel Gam HaKelim Einam B'chinas Gvul. And that's what means Midas Neser Shein Lem Sof. They have no Sof. Means they don't have a Gvul. Ach Rabbeinu, but Alter Rebbe HaKelim Hem B'chinas Gvul. Well, not here, he doesn't elaborate here, but other places he makes it very, very clear. When the Alter Rebbe writes it, he writes it they're Gvul, Mamish. And the Maimonim explain the words clearly. Let's put it this way: even if what you're saying is correct, but it's still not like the Pardes. Obviously, you could say like Biyah, the Kelim of Atzilus are pshutim in a sense. That's true. But in Atzilus, they are they Gvul or are they just potential Gvul? So there are opinions like this. The point you want to make is that there is a Koyach HaGvul that becomes actual Gvul in some place. And you could ask me, what's the point? What's the meaning of Gvul and Atzilus altogether? It's a good question.
They're actually Gvul, or the fact that they don't go out of Atzilus?
That would be the Pardes. That's the whole difference. The Pardes, yeah. It's clearly not here. He doesn't elaborate. But I could show you my Maimonim that talk about pages upon pages. Basically, the difference is very similar to the interface discussion. If you say, like the Pardes, there's ultimately a missing element in real Achdus. It means we can't really, in Elokus there's no Gvul. And according to the Alter Rebbe, yeah, but then it's not Elokus. Then it's, the interface has to, you want to have that in the divine power of creation, you want to have something that is actual defined as Gvul. It makes our connection far more real. If not, it's a sense you have to eliminate, because let's put it this way, Ilam Hazar for sure is Gvul. Correct? That's a given. This is not relative Gvul. This table is Gvul. Everything in existence is real Gvul, mamish. Physical Gvul. If you say that its root is not real Gvul, it's only power of Gvul, so basically you're saying the real Gvul mamish doesn't have really a place to connect with. It has to somewhat give up its parameters. However, if you say that Chesed of Atzilus is a Gvul, not just a Koyach Gvul, and then when you connect, obviously it's Ruchnis, this is Gashmis, but there's at least a common denominator that they're both connected to an element of Gvul. The nafkamina would be in Shuyurim of mitzvahs, which we know are absolute Gvul. It's not ambiguous. A shear is this size and not this size. And you can't change it. When a shkia is the second of shkia, there is no such thing as,
Why can we say that chesed in this world is water? Let's say water. Am I mainly sof?
It's not, because it's not. This world is not ein lam sof. In a sea, you call it, first of all, Ma'im Leim Sof is only Hashala. It's not really Ein Sof, it's only relative. It's number one. Number two, we're not talking about a Ma'im, we're talking about, what about a sheer mitzvah you're doing right now? Matzah is this size and not this size. A mezuzah has to go right here.
Right, and that's only the Eilam Hazah Agashmi.
So does that connect to anything in Holocaust, or it has to it has to shed its gvul, its parameters?
It has a mocker.
But it loses its parameters. If there's no gvul in Atzilus, there's no place where this will ever connect. This particular shear has no place in Atzilus.
Why can't we say that in Sabbath?
So if you say that, you're missing an Achdus. It's missing an Achdus.
That's the whole time of it. You want to dafka in this Eilam Hazah, where there's only in this Eilam Hazah. That's when the mitzvah should be performed. And the Maila, there's no Gvul, so that's why he didn't have the time.
But it's not a complete eloquent Achdus. That's what I would say. You have to give up some. You have to shed the element of Gvul in it. I didn't say Pardes is a tzaddik. He has an opinion. You could also explain it, but it's not as full Achdus. I mean, I told you, even the Gdelim that held
maybe
that
the Gashmis, maybe they still wanted the mitzvah Gashmis, maybe not more. Okay.
a mitzvah Gashmis has two sides to it. There's a physical part of it. There's also a shir.
Yeah.
Shir is a midah v'gvul. That midah v'gvul, you could say, you want to say, is connected to a midah v'gvul amayil. It's the argument for gvul and kelim.
That Hakim said, Eilan do, I just looked at Eilan do, and we say every morning.
Well, that immediately tells you that's only these things. That's the whole point. But most things have a shir. So, look, we connect to Elokus in all levels, in the gvul and in the gvul. So, of course, we have things that ein lam shir that connects more to erab gvul.
So these are mitzvahs.
It's interesting because I just learned talking that it says that a shiurim is all halach al Moshe Sinai. You don't find that anywhere in the Torah. It's all halach al Moshe Sinai.
Which also, it's mamish the same idea. Because a shir, in other words, is connected mamish in the mocker. It's
You
a good...
won't find any shiurim in the Torah.
Right, I know.
Hafakazayis and stuff.
And at the same time, you don't say it's the Rabbanon. You don't say it's the Rabbanon figure it out. You say it's halach al Moshe Sinai. It's the third category. It's not derived. It's a Kabbalah.
Wait, when you just said that you don't find this in the Torah?
You don't find any shiurim.
The Torah doesn't talk about...
Learn about all the sacrifices, how much you have to give, and
Doesn't say because
doesn't say how big.
No. There are shiurim in the Torah. Of course, there are size measurements. He's talking about the shir like kazayas. Like certain shiurim. Certain things which are not mentioned. We're not talking about that which is specifically mentioned. There's a whole bunch of areas where, what is considered, let's say, a mechuyev a bracha. How much? No, it says in the Sfarim that shiurim mean those that are not mentioned in Torah. The shiurim that are the so-called default shiurim for different things. Even bar mitzvah, 13, is derived from some verses and this, but it's a Kabbalah. According to one opinion, it's completely not based on one pasuk. One opinion is with Yikachish Beis Levi. They were 13, but there's an opinion that this is one of the shiurim from Matan Torah that the Moshe passed on. The bar mitzvah is 12, bas mitzvah.
No, not Yikachish Beis Levi. You're talking about the Shneim, Shimon Levi.
No, not by Yikachish. You're right. But Levi, Shimon Levi, it also says Ish.
Yeah.
Vayichu, right? By Shechem. I think. There's something like that. Yeah, right. Okay, Navi, I'm sorry. I mixed Ish and Levi. Yeah. Anyway, point is being as follows. Like we spoke with the Eir. Of course there's a shit that the Eir is pshutim. But then what happens is you have more elokus but less seer. If kelim are like the Pardes, you'll have more elokus and less seer also. On the kelim level. I can give you examples for it. There are examples. In halachas for sure, like we speak in mitzvahs, the details of the mitzvahs, they're also relevant. Let's put it this way.
We could just say that
on one hand, remember I said on one hand...
If you don't say that it's Gvul L'mayla, so then it's Mechasam Shlemus.
Yeah, but he says Kayach HaGvul. You have to say there's a Kayach HaGvul. And the Gvul, the first Gvul is the Kelim. So you could say the Kayach HaGvul in Alakus, that's enough. Everyone agrees you need a Kayach HaGvul. Even the Pardes. I'll say this. Here, I'll say this. This may help a bit. Because he doesn't explain it. But you want me to explain a bit? I'll say the following, like this. I said it yesterday, but I want to reverse it a bit. Initially, logically, intuitively, you'd think the more you abstract God from structure, the greater God is. And you make it more spiritual. That's initially how we would think. The truth is, it's the other way around. Chassidus takes Atzmus and makes it even higher. That to say Atzmus is limited to the world of spirit, right? Or to the world of Bligvul is limiting him, like David Sakedesh says. So you have to say it's beyond Bligvul and beyond Gvul. We'll soon discuss it now in Eir Bligvul and Eir Gvul. One second. In effect, when the Pardes says the Kelim are not Gvul Mamash, remember also we learned the Pardes, the same Pardes also says that the Shedish, that Esesris Agnus is Shedish Akel, not Shedish Eris. So it's a Shedish, so it's consistent. Because by him, Eir doesn't have any shape and form altogether. Kelim, at least you could say, is Keicha Gvul. Eir is B'chlal Keicha B'ligvul. So according to the Pardes, initially that seems that he's elevating God to a far higher level. And he is. I mean, that's his intention. The Pardes is, as I said, a Makubal Amiti, a tzaddik. His understanding was a correct understanding. It's just not all the highest level. Like we learned earlier about, does God have midas l'mayla or not? He's correct on that level. But if you go deeper, and according to the Ramak, if you really ask the Ramak, he probably would not say the same extent that we say Nesav Kodesh Baruch Hu B'tachtenim. According to him, would probably be more bedakus. I would say, they're not the Chassidish approach. Bedakus, I'm saying, obviously is a makubal, would be more that the purpose of existence is not to transform the structure, but is to elevate the structure to beyond structure. That would be, like we spoke a little like the Rambam. Again, I'm not saying exactly, but similar, that the ultimate is neshamas. The higher you go into Bligvul, that's where you get tachlis. Gvul is really only, so to speak, a stepping stone, a motivator, you can say, a challenge to get beyond, to enter the world of Bligvul. But the Dakas is like the Meraglim. Not Tachten, but Elyon. Yeah. They want Elyon.
He doesn't think he has much value.
Or only the value of, everyone knows Ma'aso Ikar. Remember, talking here, halach, we're not talking about people who, God forbid, have any, it's just what the focus is on is more the Ilm Haba than the Ilm Haza. Everyone says, Yafa Shachas B'shuv Ma'asim Tem B'Ilm Haza is a Mishnah. You can't argue with that. But the question is, what does that mean? You could say the Yafa, because God wants the pleasure of the battle, but the goal is Ruchnis. Rambam also knows the Yafa Shachas.
I think I say you have to...
Yeah, like that, exactly. When you go deeper, and where Chassidus goes, and says, no, the Kanesavakos B'dir B'Tachtenim, and don't limit Atzmus to Bligvul, and to Blitziyur. He also has the Keiach HaGvul, like David Sakedesh says, but more than David Sakedesh. He also has Gvul. The Lakus manifests in Gvul. Not that Lakus becomes Gvul. It manifests in Gvul. Tzad Shleimus. And not higher than Atzilus, there's no Midas, there's no Chochmah, less Machshava Tisbei Klal. But he does manifest, and there's Hu Hamada, Hu Yedei, Hu Yedua. He becomes one. We're going to say Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad. He becomes one with the Gvul and works through it. So then what you have is two things. First of all, you have a deeper understanding of Atzmus beyond even Bligvul, and you also have a deeper immersion in Elam Haza, because you can actually make Gvul a Lakus. And you don't have to, so-called, ultimately shed the Gvul. The purpose could be Elam Haza. Not, God forbid, that Ruchnis is not superior. Because also, even according to what I just said, it doesn't mean the Haipach HaMaraglim is not indulgence in Elam Haza either. That's Kairach. That's the other extreme. So it's not about suddenly, the world is so important. No. Atzmus is so beyond that even a world like ours can be elevated, and you don't need to destroy, annihilate the parameters of existence. That's the key here. Yeah, where the other one is, you always have to obviously eliminate Ra, selfishness and evil and things that are anti-God. But the structure, even of other structures, you could say that's like Shiurim L'Meish Messina. I like that. That the Shiurim are connected. It's like we say about Elam Mishpatim, Af Elu Nitne Messina, or the good. In other words, even logic was also given from Sinai, not just the Hechler mitzvahs.
So the Meraglim are nearly as good as Korach, would seem like.
They both are not considered in the Sheresh and Yonim. They were tzaddikim, all of them. Korach too. Meraglim it says Ein Lam Chelik Elam Haba. The Rameh writes because they were higher than Elam Haba. That's why Ein Lam Chelik. Yeah. I'll tell you a story. It was Parsha Shlach Tovshin Mem Beis Mem Gimel. The Rebbe spoke about Meraglim in this way, that their kavanah was really ruchnius. That's why they would ksherim hayu. You know, how could such great people fall like that? It wasn't because they suddenly got scared or they didn't know God promised to go to the promised land. The whole yesod of Yiddishkeit is that to go to Israel. So suddenly they forgot. They don't believe. So the Rebbe said it was because of their ruchnius. Just look what the Torah says. But the Rebbe elaborated and spoke very highly of Inlam Chilik Elam Haba. Means higher than Elam Haba and higher than a Chilik in Elam Haba. That's the word. The Rameh Parna writes this. Anyway, after the first Sikha, so my Shver started singing Chol Karnei Rishayim. I know you're smiling, but listen. So the Rebbe stopped. They started singing Chol Karnei Rishayim. So the Rebbe stopped and said, Meret, we just spoke about how the Meraglim are Mezik Chol Karnei. So my Shver right away, without missing, Yifrach B'Yomov. Okay, not Rishayim, fine, it's Tzadikim, let's go.
What was he thinking when he said
He probably,
maybe he didn't hear the whole thing?
You heard it, no, but it was like eliminating. I don't know what he was thinking. That's what happened. But it was instinctive, instinctive. You talk about the Meraglim and anyway.
But in Torah you say the same thing.
They say the Shpola Zayda, his Zayda said that the Helik, not the Shpola Zayda, was it the Helik, the culture, the Dishner? One of them said that the Helik is Zayda Kerach. Kerach was not a simple man, he was a picker, he was a great man. He made a mistake.
Say the tshuva.
Besides the tshuva, but even his mutiny was not based on pettiness. There's very deep reasons for it. It's not for here. The point that I want to make is, okay, so going back, so you see, and this is the beauty of Chassidus, what it comes and does that two extremes. It makes an elikus far higher, and that way it can also permeate far lower. It's a very unbelievable concept. It's also in Vayelech and Samach Vav. This is fundamental. He talks about what is Ein Sof. So some say Kesed is Ein Sof, and the Ramak says no, you can't say Ein Sof on Kesed because Kesed you have to say it on Atzmus. But it goes there the whole discussion of the same idea of what you unite with. Are you uniting with Atzmus and we shed our personalities, or do your personality is intact, but then you're not uniting really with Atzmus, you're uniting with lower levels. And Chassidus comes and makes the Chiddush of Oyer. You can connect all the way to the top, and it could also be within the structure of existence. But the truth is, the beauty is, you can never appreciate the Chassidus depth without first going through the Kobolim and understanding the different opinions and their arguments. Then you can come and realize a whole full picture. Because everything they say is correct. There are times, for example, when you're sitting Yom Kippur davening, you shouldn't be focusing on the gvul of Elikus. You're focusing on the bligvul of Elikus. When you're at work, you shouldn't be focusing on the bligvul. You should be focusing on doing your business right. So everybody's right. It depends where you're talking. If you're in a state of spiritual state, in the middle of davening, you're not now. You're in a state where you're going upward. Then there's times you have to go inward, downward. That is. It's not a contradiction. It all comes down to different types of Aveda. Some are more believable. And when we say a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu, right? Lahad l'knei Chanukah, or Aniach Tefillin, whatever. So you say Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu, you're focusing on Kedusha and Sivui of Elikus. It's Bligvul. What's Bligvul? Because it doesn't say any mitzvah. Every mitzvah has the same Asher Kiddushanu. And you finish and say Laniach Tefillin. So Laniach Tefillin is a specific tefillin, and you need both Kavanah Klal and Kavanah Pratis. And one is not. So you could say, okay, the Ikir is Ratzon, except in this case, happen to be doing tefillin. Or you say no, the Ratzon is very important, and the tefillin is very important. It has to be specifically this mitzvah, not another mitzvah, and that's relevant all the way to the Sheirish. Because you could argue, all that God wants is fulfill my will. Which will? Okay, sometimes I want you to do this, but it's more arbitrary. Chaz v'sholom, I'm not talking about arbitrary, it's not leikuva, that you're not supposed to do it. But it's not so in the philosophical sense. The detail is not as important as the as the overall. We learned this here about Kavanah Klal and Kavanah Pratis. In Chassidus, ultimately, the Tivuch has to be the best of all worlds, essentially. So when you're in a detail, like a Pnimi, he's there completely. It also explains, the halachas that they're not Ma'aragat rather bring the halach al-mizbeach. Like when you walk to the mizbeach, the kohen, to Zikas Adam, so the walking is only a necessity because you have to get to the mizbeach. But nevertheless, they establish that itself as an avodah. Because in Kedusha, there's no such thing as an intermediary, that's just a tofel, that's just a step.
The journey itself is
Yeah, the journey. Which also emphasizes how the details are relevant. It's not just get to the purpose, get to the ultimate objective.
That's why you put your eyes on first. I mean,
tell me when it's 10:30. Yeah. So let's go on now. Okay. So now this is we continue learning as well. I'll just read from here, even though we read it already, but we'll continue. The Tachas HaKavanah is, so where's the root of the Gvul Natsilis? That's from the Kayach HaGvul Neinsof. So now we're not saying Gvul Neinsof, we're saying Kayach HaGvul, Eisis HaRashima. Because the purpose, the Tachas HaKavanah is Galas Kayach HaGvul B'Chdei Shiyah Mitzias HaYesh. So he's now really establishing why you have to say actually that's actual Gvul. Because what's the whole purpose of the Kayach HaGvul? The purpose is to create a Metzias HaYesh. What would the Parda say to that?
in this world.
Yeah. He'd say only in this world.
Yes.
Okay. The Kasher Ola B'Ritzeinei, the Heitzel Livres Elam Zayin Shi Elam is B'Chinas Metzias Nizgal. Actually, okay, one second. In Nizgal Kayach HaGvul Shabetzev, when it rose in his desire to emanate and to create the worlds, it means a world of substance. That's when was revealed the Kayach HaGvul. Had that desire not come to be, there'd be no reason for having a Kayach HaGvul. I correct myself. I don't think he's making a case here for the Gvul of the Alter Rebbe as opposed to he's just making a case for the power that you need Gvul, period. That in B'chinas Ein Sof Abli Gvul Liyish Shezeh is Galos Mina Atzmos. If you remember when we started the Shavuos Ayin Gimel, he spoke about the difference between the Eira Bli Gvul and Eira Gvul. That's what I wanted to say yesterday. Just we ran out of time. She says, remember the whole thing began, which is really, I haven't mentioned in a while, but all this that we're discussing is coming back to explain, if you remember, how did he get to the Avos of Matan Torah? Because his question was, what is the purpose of Eira Bli Gvul? And his answer was, is to create bittul in the world. Because Eira Gvul, because it measures and defines existence, it can't create real bittul. It does create bittul. He says that gufa comes from the power of Eira Bli Gvul. If you remember, he spoke about Eira Bli Gvul, it doesn't have a purpose. But he said but there's no such thing as no purpose, because everything is ratzon. Remember chapter 128, he says it has to have a kavanah. Even though it's only a gilim and a etzem. The kavanah is to create bittul. But the Eira Gvul for sure has a kavanah, because that's what creates structure. So now he's going back to this idea. So if it was only Eira Bli Gvul, you wouldn't be able, nothing would ever create a structure of existence. So as soon as God wants, Adir B'Taktenim wants to have a world, there has to be an emergence of a Kayach HaGvul. That's what he's saying now. As we said, Eira Bli Gvul, Ensof Bli Gvul, it says Galos about how is it B'chinas Ensof, B'chinas Bli Gvul? Because it is basically the expression of Atzmos, like we said. Atzmos does not have to express himself in anything. Definitely not in Bli Gvul either. But if Atzmos expresses himself, it's going to naturally be in a Bli Gvul way. It's not going to be limited because Elikus is undefined. So the true definition of Atzmos is undefined even by the word undefined. But if you're going to manifest it in some form of expression, it's going to be an undefined expression, meaning an infinite expression, rather than a finite one.
Why? You can't choose to do a finite expression.
You can choose, but that's a choice. If Elikus expresses itself, what is it going to be? One thing or infinite possibilities? What would it be? What would be logical to you? Talking about in the world of logic.
On the world of love, it's a spiritual thing. It's a big world.
Not just spiritual, it's shleimus. It has everything. Atzmus has everything.
Right.
So if that Atzmus suddenly decides, I want to manifest, you're going to see everything or one thing. For there to be one thing, there needs to be a particular choice that he wants one thing.
Right.
If he just expresses himself, if he doesn't just
Gone forever.
right, it's the natural would be everything. Yesh lim zeh mitzvah say yesh. Val kein kesh alle b'tzein yizbarach lahaitzel livrei, and that's why when it arose in the desire to emanate and to create, to kamayim a shake of amudei sheish. Shake of zeh elam shnei kadosh baruch livrei say that what the shake of means here, the word chukka, yearning, longing, desire and longing to create the world. That's an addition. That's something that is now imposing itself because he wants something specific. So that conceals the keich habligvul, and the power of the finite becomes revealed. Shemazenhu is savas elamis, from which will become the creation of the defined, structured, parameter world.
So the mind, you can have infinite thoughts, and then he wants to focus on one thought.
Correct.
The other ones can become misalim. For the moment.
Yeah. Let's call it a limited reality. Let's just say a human being has the power to throw a stone. You have the power even before you throw the stone. So now you take a stone, and you're ready to throw it. It's very clear, there's no question that you're going to only have a limited power. The stone is going to at some point have to fall. You could throw it a mile, you could throw it a half a mile, a quarter mile, doesn't matter. The power is limited, and therefore when the power is revealed, it's going to be limited. When you're dealing with an entity that has no limits, if it's going to express itself, it's going to express itself in infinite power. So if God would throw a stone, it would go forever. If it doesn't go forever, it's because he wants it not to go forever. He has to choose not to let himself, to limit, so to speak, this unlimited power, and make it be gvul. So keich gvul, which is what he's going to say. How could you say the other way?
He has to choose to use his infinite power. I mean,
but if he just chooses to use his power, period, what will it look like? Infinite or finite? The natural would be, in the world of logic, of course, if course he could choose.
It's also Yoshua Hashem.
In other words, the point is, God is not defined by being complete. He's not defined by being infinite. But if he is going to be defined, in a world of definition, it will be far more natural, infinite than finite. Correct. Then there's another element. Because he's not defined by infinite, he could manifest, and he does. That's the point here. An artist, even a human being, when you say an artist can create art, you're not going to say that an artist can only create one piece of art. Even a human artist, you're going to say he can create many pieces. I know. He's a musician, he's an artist, he can create many types of music. If he's choosing one, it means he's decided to make one right now. So with Atzmus, it's even more so. Now obviously Atzmus is not defined by being the word artist either. So of course there's a distance. Listen, this is a critical component in Chassidus. Bli Gvul ultimately is as distant from Atzmus as Gvul is, in the context of beyond everything. But once you go into a world of existential, not non-existential, I'm not talking about the non-existential, Atzmus built to Mitzias Nimtza. Once you go into the existential, let's put it this way, greater power is reflective of greater godly revelation than lesser power. When we say Yad HaChazaka by Pesach, what's Yad HaChazaka? What do you mean? Yad HaChazaka could be when he does nothing, when he does minimal. There's more power in Golus than there is in Geula, because God has the power to conceal. But you can't call that we're talking about in the parameters of our world where there's strength and there's power, wisdom. Would you say God is less wise than everybody? Of course he could be less wise if he wants to be. You'd say, if we have wisdom, God is infinite wisdom. Again, we're not talking about Atzmus doesn't need all of it. Atzmus is beyond both. But if he's going to manifest, let's put it this way, if Atzmus is going to come to the table, he's going to be the best at the table. That's what it means. The most complete. In the world of shleimus, he's going to be the most shleimus. That, like we say by ayin. What do we say to Lashon? Ayin le'yotzer. He doesn't have eye.
Yitzrayin le'yabit.
Yeah, Yitzrayin le'yabit. The one who shaped an eye cannot see. What are we saying? We're not saying he sees like we see. We're saying he shaped the eye, so for sure he sees. But we don't say he sees. We say you cannot say he doesn't see because he shaped it. So that's the point I'm trying to make. In the world, because remember, God wants a relationship with us. We're not talking about atzmus. Atzmus is b'chlal is beyond it all.
It has to be in our comfort zone.
So in our so-called realm of reality, if someone will say to you, you know what, I don't have to be in awe of atzmus. Atzmus is right here with me on the table. We're buddies. And he'll say, no, you're missing the real experience of atzmus. Is that you need to know that is not you. That's what I'm saying to you. Let's put it this way: the root of pantheism, subtly, of Spinoza, which is that God is the world and the world is God. Nature is God and God is nature. That would be the trap if you say the Eir HaGvul is as close, is basically just as Atzmus, is a revelation of Atzmus, just like Eir HaGvul. We need to know that God is beyond us. So in other words, to say, since God is even beyond us, so then we have Him right here. I don't have to do anything. I don't even have to do a mitzvah. I have God. God's not limited in a world with his thought mitzvahs. God can also manifest if I'm selfish. There'd be no reason to elevate. Because you could say God is everywhere. That's it. That was what the Frankisten did. They said, let's go sin, sexual improprieties. They had orgies and so on. God is everywhere. What, are you limiting God only when you're holy? God is in the darkest profane. What's wrong with that? It's not just wrong because it's not halachic. Because what you're doing is you're taking God and making Him you. Self-worship at the end of the day. So that's not the point. The point is you have to know there's a God beyond us all. Even in other words, even in the realm of where there's a relationship, you have to know that there's a divine element. Then there's the atzmus that's beyond it all. So the Koyach HaGvul teaches you that God is not limited to Bli Gvul. But the Bli Gvul teaches you the awesomeness of God's power. In other words, yes, you're talking about something that's far greater than anything that any finite creature could ever reach. There is a godliness in that. Kedusha is beyond me. You understand the point? That's the key here.
Sounds better.
So of course, in Chayil, you can find deeper godliness. But but that doesn't ever diminish and say that Kedusha is not more revealed divine than Chayil. The key is the word revealed and expressed. In reveal and expression, Atzilus and Eretz Sof Lifnei Atzimsum is far higher than Elam Hazeh. If you're talking about the Atzmus, the Kavana is far greater down here. But that's because it's concealed. And not because that's God, because that's what God wants. There's what God wants and there's what God is. Kedusha and Gilui helps us integrate what God is, not just what He wants. That was Kerech's mistake. Kerech was the other way around. He said, okay, we don't stay in Ruchnis, let's go into Gashmis. We don't need leaders, we don't need teachers. God is everywhere. Kulam Kadeshim. Everybody's holy. That's what he said. Madu Tisnasa. Why did you elevate yourselves? Everybody's holy. What do we need Atzilus and Eir Bli Gvul? Gvul is also great. Yeah, but it's true. But you need to reveal, you need to have the awe and the connection before you...
You experienced the Gvul, right? If you went into the earth.
What time do we have? What time do we have now?
7 minutes.
10:08.
Okay, fine. Okay.
We're up to
V'agam d'keich hagvul. Okay, now he goes on. V'agam d'keich hagvul.
Oh no, that's not. Past that.
Hu gam ken keich atzmus. Here we go. And even though the power gvul is also keich atzmus, and the other way around, hu kamei ken keich hagvul en atzmus mamash. Exactly what we're discussing now. The keich hagvul is also a keich of atzmus. Keich bli gvul is also not atzmus mamash. So what are you saying here? That so it's like a question. So why are you saying one has to be concealed and one is revealed and that's how you create? Keich hagvul is konsum atzmus. Keich bli gvul is not atzmus either. How do we know it's not atzmus mamash? Because atzmus is higher from gvul, from the level of gvul, the higher from bli gvul, and both are equal compared to him. However, here's the key. Mikol mokem kishol, but it's saying she is galus min atzmus. That's the point. He's galus min atzmus. Once it rose in the desire, there should be a revelation of Atzmus, meaning not Atzmus in his pure, so-called isolated, exclusive domain, but he wants an expression. I could say it's from Mitzias built to Mitzias Nimtza, has now entered the world of Mitzias Nimtza. Okay? Into some form of expression, he needs Galus of B'chinas Ein Sof of B'chinas Blikvul. The revelation is in the form of Ein Sof and form of Blikvul. That's why from this power of Blikvul we know the existence of Atzmus. Because it's a revelation of Atzmus Shemitzada Atzmus, from the perspective of Atzmus. If let's say, listen to this, if let's say Atzmus would have jumped Blikvul and right away expressed himself in a Keich HaGvul, he wouldn't have all those levels that we talk about. Huh? Yeah, we couldn't climb. That's one thing. We can climb to Keich HaGvul, and from there into Atzmus. What you would be lacking is a revelation from Atzmus perspective. Let me explain. Let's say you have a mediation. Two entities. One is an entity that has unlimited possibilities. Another one has limited possibilities. So yes, you could say you know what? We can't deal with all your unlimited possibilities. We need you to speak on our terms. Our terms is Gvul. Here's a world with structure. And God would jump the Bli Gvul step, so you don't have a representation of divine in its betarose, as they say, in its own purity. It's already been shaped by the structure of existence. Yes, He wants the structure. God wants this structure. But someone says, so what is God like? We don't really know. We don't know what God is like. You know why we don't know? We only know what God is like through the structure that He chose. But Eira Bli Gvul teaches you what God is like on His own. I gave the example earlier on. Let's say you have a king. He has a chief of staff, and then he has a whole bunch of departments, right? Each department is dedicated to certain things. One department is dedicated to bring food. Another is correspondence. Another goes out to battle. Another administrates. The kings, someone will say they'll go to the administrative department, or they'll go to the legal department, or they'll go to the correspondence department and say, is this the king? They'll say, this is a part of what the king wants. You go to another department. What is this one? It's a different part. Can someone tell me what the king is like? They say, none of us can tell you, because each of us only represents a certain component. You want to know what he's like? Go speak to his chief of staff. He sits with him all day, and he gets the orders that we get from him to tell each of us what to do. He'll tell you what the king is like. You go to him, he says, the king is not this department, he's not this department, he's not the sum total of all departments. He's a whole entity. He's got a lot going. And as many departments as you see, there's more departments, there's infinite departments. And then you start getting a sense, what is this God like? You follow? So if you had a jump from Atzmus to Keich HaGvul, you have a jump from the king to the departments. So yes, that's what the kavod is, the departments, but you never get a sense, what is the king like? I want to know what he's like. What does he look like? So you could say you can't see him. Fine. He's beyond anything. Yeah, but I want to know something about him in my terms. So in our world of Ma'amal Kalam and Gvul, Bli Gvul plays a tremendous role because it teaches us about God's personality beyond us. It's not a sum of our parts. That's the key. That's what he says.
Bli Gvul is the chief of staff.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, like it is something that just all its inyan is Gilei Etzem. I want to know what the Etzem is like.
He's the interface.
Oh, that's a nice mark.
We'll learn even more that it even reveals the power of Gvul, so the Eira Bli Gvul reveals. Because without that, all you have is departments. Like I said, if you had no Eira Bli Gvul, you'd get stuck. Okay, there's a tree, there's Tzemeach, there's Chai, Tzemeach, Daim Tzemeach, Chai, Medaber, the whole structure, it's all put here by God. You would not be able to really understand the godliness in it. You'd know each thing for what it is, its role, and you would not be able to go to a place of what does God have to say about all this. It would be like saying in the bracha, not Asher Kedushan Mitzvah Tzivanu, you'd say Baruch Atah Hashem La'aniach Tefillin. You need the Asher Kedushan Mitzvah Tzivanu to give you a connection to the divine dimension. It's like Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shamayim before Kabbalah Sel Mitzvahs. Kabul malchusei, kabul gzeresei. You need to have a connection to the thing itself. I want experiencing you. You know what would be the equivalent? Another example, in spouses, marriage. That the only relationship spouses have is actions. What do you want me to do today, honey? You go do it. There's no relationship. There's no I love you, you love me, that I accept you, you accept me. It's detail oriented. It's action. It's gvul oriented. This. The bli gvul is the connection between you and the other person that's not even tangible. And as a result of that comes all the details. I'm just trying to find more and more examples of it. I think it's enough. But in other words, you need to have, in the world of Gilui, you need to have something that is expressive of the whole picture. It would be another example. You never see the horizon. You never see the bird's eye view. You see the details. Imagine you can never see the bird's eye view. Then what you're lacking is the perspective. So Eira Gvul gives you the perspective of each specific detail. But when someone says, okay, what's the chokhmah within? Here's a good example. Chokhmah, not the bina. What's the ak? The bird, the blueprint. I want to know the big picture. You have no access to the big picture because you have no Eira bli gvul. I mean, again, these are all examples that the Keich Gvul is still a Keich Atzmus, and in some ways is going to reflect something deeper. Okay? Well, the Keich Gvul Biloni Yedim Mitzis Atzmus Lishu B'chinas is Galas Atzmus Shemitzad Atzmus. That's the key. It's not just his Galas Atzmus, not just revelation of Atzmus. Shemitzad Atzmus. It's revealing Atzmus as it is from the perspective of Atzmus. Like we learned before, chapter 128. What does he say there? Let me just look, my friends. Anybody remember? What was Kuf Chav Ches? Interesting. Oh, wow. Yeah, the beginning of the Shavuos Maimer, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, but that's why it causes bittul. Because it's not on the terms of our terms, it's the bird's eye picture. It's the bird's eye view. Right, exactly. So just from the power of Gvul, we would not know even Metzias Atzmus. Why? Ask
has to come from somebody.
He's asking a question, right? And even though the Cheder, what do you mean? Why are you saying that? We also know Metzias Atzmus because it also comes from Atzmus. You see, let's say a tree. Okay, you don't know the whole picture,
You know it's coming.
but it's coming from somewhere. So you know Atzmus. 1 second. He's asking a question, and moreover, the Mezed Dafka Yedim is Keich Atzmus. And from Gvul, you actually know even something bigger than the Eira bli gvul reveals. You know Keich Atzmus, the power that he can create. In Eira bli gvul, on the other hand, even though you know the whole breadth of Atzmus, but you don't know the power.
You only know Metzias Atzmus.
Correct. The Keich Atzmus is in Keich Gvul more, as we discussed, because you need to have that additional power to show you that Shlema, that he's not limited to bli gvul, that shows you much more his power. With Eira bli gvul alone, you could assume, if we only had Eira bli gvul, that God owes only gvul, like the Avedish case, and he doesn't have the power of gvul. He's in the realm of bli gvul, infinite. So it's all a question. And he continues, the Rishimul who mebchinas atzmus einsof, mebchinas pnimius yesed. The Shimul, which is what? The Shimul was the residue, the impression, the Keich HaGvul, is in a even deeper Pnimis Yesir Atzmus than the Eir. It's still all the question, and he keeps on going with the question. Kamal derech mashal hazrika shebekeir davke ubeetzma yad lo yadei azbaz. Like for example, throwing. Shebekeir davke, that requires a particular energy,
A deeper strength.
a deeper strength. It's not just the fingers. It's not like, let's say, when you paint. We learned this earlier. Not just when you draw, so there you're more precise. But when you throw something, it's not just, it's you need much more energy. You need to invest more energy in the arm. Then we learned this before in chapter 54. That just means that he took treides, he took, what do we call it, pebbles. And Zarkan, that became the earth, I believe, that's what he said. So Zrika is an example, God needs more power. In other words, like we said, the natural extension would be bligvul. To create something requires a deeper strength. The chain, that's the mashal, and the nimshal, and the moral. The chain b'savas yesh dafka nira keich atzmus. And the same thing in the creation of the yesh, you see the power of atzmus. The hu levada b'keich v'yachol telavas yesh mayin ve'evas hamuchlet. Like he says in the Gersa case, because he's the only one that can create something from nothing, something completely different. Whereas Eira Bligvul, you could say, one second, so if there was only Eira Bligvul, you wouldn't know that. It's the Yesh that reveals that Atzmus, the true power of Atzmus. My niggin is still as question, because now comes a whole parenthesis. The conclusion of this is going to be the top of page Shin Gimel. Yinezeo Kasher, that's going to be the answer. So all this is still a question. Just keep in mind. The question is, back to this. Keich HaGvul also comes from Atzmus. Also shows you there's Atzmus. Moreover, it shows you that there's a power in Atzmus that Eira Bligvul can't reveal. So we're still in the question. Let's continue with the parentheses. Now he's qualifying it the other way around. In truth, also from the power of the infinite, we know Keich Atzmus, not just Mitzias Atzmus. So he's adding now a new point. Because this, to be an air that is mamish ein sof and bligvul, has a rak b'keich atzmus. That could be only with the power of atzmus. What does that mean?
There's always a Mekol Mokem.
Mekol Mokem ikar keich atzmus u b'keich hagvul. Nevertheless, the primary power of atzmus is in keich hagvul. I'll explain in a moment. Let me just go. The Godel Yeshu Keich Atzmus B'inyan Yisavas B'inyan Hagili. It's a very important expression. Because the power of Atzmus is greater in creation than in revelation. V'haraya, and the proof. B'inyan Yisavas Lo Yesh B'chei Kanevroim. Creation doesn't exist in our realm. That's interesting proof. Whereas Giluyim, to reveal something, we also have. Creatures can also do that. The only thing is, our revelations, like I said before, are limited. Because our etzim is also limited. Nevertheless, he's also qualifying this. Oh, what's it? You know something? No, this is all started in the parentheses. The Hine Zehu is still in the parentheses. The answer comes after the parentheses. Okay, we got to read it all.
Parentheses of other perhaps?
Yeah. 1 second, but let's do this Galasan slowly. 1 second. So now he said, the Keich HaBligvul, you also see very simple. If you see a Eira Bligvul, let's say you see infinite possibilities. Let's say right now, infinite possibilities. That also tells you that Atzmus has infinite possibilities. It's not just that Atzmus exists, but it's the power of Atzmus. Yet, because it's not a creation of something that is unique to Atzmus, meaning anyone can really reveal. There's something here that he's creating something completely different than himself, a yesh, that senses itself as an independent entity. That teaches you far deeper the power of Atzmus. You understand the point that he's making here? It's a far deeper point. It's a very, very important point he's making. Keich HaBligvul also reveals Atzmus's power. But it's Atzmus's power that is much more, let's put it this way, it's not as shocking. I could say that. It wouldn't be shock you. If you saw suddenly Ein Sof coming from Atzmus, Ein Sof possibilities, yes, it's awesome. And it shows you the awesomeness of Atzmus, unbelievable possibilities. You see infinite possibilities. Just imagine, infinite flow of energy. If we humans could experience infinite, it would be awesome. That Atzma, look what Atzmas has. The ability to flow and flow and flow and flow, every possible direction, every way. Bli gvul mamash, right? That's what he says, bli gvul mamash. However, as amazing as that is, there's nothing shocking about it. It's awesome, but it's not shocking. He's revealing himself, and Atzmas has power to reveal. Suddenly he creates a yesh like us, a stupid yesh that can convince itself it's self-contained and doesn't need anybody. Completely the exact opposite extreme. That tells you, wow, if Atzmas can create something so crazy, this Atzmas is completely beyond me. The other one, awesome, of course. It's natural that God should be able to do anything. That He can do something like this, what kind of Atzmas is this? What kind of personality? I don't even relate. It's like doesn't. So if a wise person reveals wisdom, so you're awe. How much wisdom does he have? Unbelievable. The Rebbe, a flow, goes endless, more and more and more. Okay, then you suddenly see a wise person does something, it's completely not like him. Suddenly out of him comes some type of idiot. I'm using an example, say, what is this? And that also came from that source. Man alive, that's completely beyond me. So the koyach is far deeper. It's like, that's zrika. He's throwing something now. He's not just expressing. He's throwing something. He's doing something completely out of
our expectation.
Yeah, so this is critical here. So God that's what he means. So more power of Atzmus in Hisavus, in creating something, than in revealing. And he brings the proof. Because all of us could reveal. We all reveal things. The only thing is, we could only reveal what we have. So we reveal, if I throw a stone, I can only throw it a few feet, a few yards. Because I myself am Gvul. But the power of Gili we have. If God throws, He throws forever. Okay. But Gili. But to create something completely different, that we don't have. That just shows you that the Koyach is a Koyach Atzmus. Shows you deeper, the Koyach Atzmus distinguishes God from us far deeper than a Gili. So to say, here's two emanators. One is a projector that emanates only short, and here's God projecting infinite. Okay? But we emanate a little, so He emanates a lot more. Qualitatively, we're in the same realm. We're both revealing. But if God suddenly does something, doesn't even emanate, He's creating something that's completely that we can't even do. It shows you that this projector, this source, is far different and far greater than that. This piece is that I don't think it exists in other Maimorim. I have to look. I've not seen such quite explicit explanation. Now he gives another qualification. Even by Nivroim, there's also examples of Bli Gvul. Like when you love with all your might. And it's known that's the primary elikus in the shamas, their ability, not b'chol avavcha, b'chol nafshecha, which is limited to your heart and your soul. B'chol meidecha. Meidecha means ma'id, Bli Gvul, beyond. That's the ikar in elikus. V'zel l'cha Hashem ha'gedula zu ma'aseh bereishis. And this is the Cha Hashem ha'gedula zu ma'aseh bereishis. What's zehu? Ava m'chol meidecha? Or Koyach HaGvul? Yeah. Yesh Gam Ken Giluyim is almost a parenthesis. He's not really elaborating. He's just saying, there's also Giluyim b'chol meidecha. Fine. That even in Giluyim you have that. Oh no, he's just qualifying that we also have, in Ibrahim, we also have Giluyim b'chol meidecha. In other words, and the parenthesis explains how could we Gvul have Bli Gvul Meidecha, because that's the Ikar Elikus. Understand? So we also have the element of Bli Gvul. But let's go back to the point. But creation, not revelation. Nisavos, that's only B'Koyach HaBeirah. And that's V'zeu l'cha Hashem ha'gedula zu ma'aseh bereishis. That's why we say l'cha Hashem ha'gedula. This is creation of existence, because that's where you see the primary power of Atzmus, not in Eira Bli Gvul, but in ma'aseh bereishis. Okay? Kumeshkas makamacha de bisavas beyond niriyes keich of bisavas atzilus. Like it says elsewhere, in the creation of Biyah, you see more the power of Ensev than in the creation of Atzilus. V'ayin mashiz bar le'el be'in elikei loshen keich.
You need more kayach to create the world.
Mashiz bar le'kamen rather. And look what it says later, elikei is loshen keich. Right. Now we're still in the parentheses. Correct?
I think we're ending it now.
That ends it?
Yeah. It doesn't.
Oh, okay, so then my mistake. Okay. So then I was wrong. Then it is this is the Eisphir. So, okay, it does end it, right. Okay. So let me just go back. So what were we up to? So he said, so bottom line...
At the end, there's another parenthesis ending. I don't know.
No, that's just a line before. Right, that's just the line. I also thought so.
There's two of those.
Where?
Small ones, yeah.
There's one of them.
The small ones, those are small ones. Okay, but let's go back. So this parenthesis just qualified a little more explanation. You can't say Keich HaBligvul is completely not revealing Keich HaAtzmus. So, but we still have established, and this is still part of the question, that Esav that the creation, Keich HaGvul reveals a more power of Atzmus, the primary power of Atzmus, more than Keich HaBligvul. So how could you say before, we were saying that Davke Bligvul was Metzias HaAtzmus, right? That you say, so it says, this knowledge, this awareness of the power of Atzmus is only once there was a revelation of Keich HaBligvul. If you just had a jump from Atzmus to Keich HaGvul, you wouldn't have Gilui. We learned this before also in Pei Kuf Chav Ches. Remember Kuf Chav Tes? That guf is bittul in Mimala is because there's he says v'hainu kishiyesh keich habligvul v'keich hagvul, when you have both a power of infinite and a power of finite, on a yedim keich hagvul is keich atzmus, then you know from the keich hagvul the power of atzmus. Ki keich habligvul u'b'chinas gilui, because keich habligvul, the power of the infinite, that's the power of revelation. U'mezeh shonu reim v'yedim hayisun v'schazah shabekeich hagvul. And from this, once you see this Keich HaBligvul, which is Gili, and then you see, and from this, that we see and we know, and the advantage and the schachus of Keich HaGvul, that's how we know the power of Atzmus. Aval Keich HaGvul levad, if you didn't have Keich HaBligvul, if you only had the Keich HaGvul levad, only the power of the finite alone, we wouldn't know the power of Atzmus, we wouldn't even know the existence of Atzmus. All we know is that there's Gvul. In other words, Gvul is no Gilui in it. Gvul, once there's a Gilui, Gvul tells you, that's a greater power. But there would be no knowledge, there'd be no awareness. Where's a knowledge and awareness come from? That comes from Gilui, and Gilui is Era Bligvul. Why can't you say there's a little Gilui in Keich HaGvul? Clearly because, like I said before, it's not similar to the source. That's why. 1 second. Because Keich HaGvul is Helen Be'etzim is fundamentally concealed, because I said it's completely not like the source.
Yeah, from a table, you want.
And from it you'd never have any knowledge at all, no awareness. There'd be no awareness. And through Gili Atzmus, which is the Gili HaBligvul, through the Gili of Atzmus, that there's Giluyim in the Welt, meaning, like remember you spoke about Atzilus, that was Atzilus also. It brings awareness and feelings. We know the Keich Atzmus is also in the Keich HaGvul, in the Keich HaGvul rather. And we also know the Heidich Keich HaBligvul v'Keich HaGvul. We also know how to measure and to qualify. Heidich, to upmessen, how do you say, to upschatzen, to measure, to appreciate. Keich HaGvul, the both the infinite and this, and the advantage of the power of Gvul, of the finite. However, from Keich HaBligvul alone,
even without the Keich HaGvul, you know.
From this alone, we know Metzias Atzmus. V'gam Keich Atzmus, like he said in the parentheses, also the power, but not to the extent. V'hainu liyesis galas Atzmus, because it's a revelation of Atzmus. So of course, we know the Atzmus. M'kol mokum yedim is erak Metzias Atzmus, lo eifena Atzmus. Now he's adding a new thing.
Past.
Huh? Past? How much past?
35.
Okay, I'm gonna have to run somewhere. Okay. I'll finish the chapter. Here's a new word now. We have Metzias Atzmus, Koyach Atzmus, now Eifena Atzmus. Eifena Atzmus means the way Atzmus is. So Metzias is existence. Koyach is the power. Eifena is the Eif.
The personality.
Yeah. Even though from Koyach HaBlikul you also know personality, but you don't know the extent. So he says, "B'hainu li yesha'er Atzmus ein be'enarech klal." And that's because, you know what? Maybe we should stop here because I see I'm going to need to explain this whole thing with Eir Atzmus. I could read it quickly, but I'd rather read it. Huh? Let's stop here. There's going to be we need a whole explanation of Eir Atzmus as he's going into it. I thought it was just concluding. Heavy chapter. Okay. So we did second part of chapter 153, pages 302 and 303. And we're by the closing end of chapter 153. Okay, we'll stop here.